how have you been, man?
Pretty good.
Good. Well, welcome to Texas.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm glad to be here.
Oh. Yeah, as soon as Santiago told me that, you were coming down, I was like, oh, I got to go get lunch and meet him. It's always nice when you get to meet someone from a group chat or something. So
I know. As soon as he told me, I'm like, yes. Oh, I mean, I could have put it together, which guys are from what kind of part of the country you can kind of figure out. But yeah, no, I'm excited to be here, and it's fun to meet in person and to be on the pod. So I don't even know what
I really don't know either. I thought why not just take a chance to we just had lunch. We just shot the crap for like an hour and a half. It was a good time, so why not? I am joined today by Pastor Andrew Isker at BonifaceOption on Twitter. You kind of can't go wrong with his tweets or where he goes when it comes to the scene here in America. So welcome. How are you, man?
Thank you. I'm good. Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. Fun to be here with you in the flesh.
I know.
Can we tell them that we're not disembodied?
So we are recording from for me once again. I'm at the New Founding offices down in Dallas, and it's a much more professional recording studio than either of our places. But great chance to meet you in person and to have lunch and to get to know more of the New Founding gang. So what an opportunity.
Yeah, and I have to say, publicly for the very first time that the food in Texas is unbelievable. It is. We had brisket today, and they're apparently really good down here at making it, and so I'm blown away by that too. But no, being here is great. It's fun hanging out with these guys, getting to meet you, and discuss many things. There's a lot going on in the world right now.
Yes,
apparently.
there is. And you've also just recently started a podcast, if you wanted to tell the audience about it.
I could plug that to your folks. I with my friend CJ Engel, who is at Contra Mundum, we started a podcast recently called Contra Mundum, where he and I discuss. I mean, sometimes we'll discuss the news. If there's not a ton of newsworthy stuff going on, we'll there's always plenty of online controversies to talk about as well.
Always.
And so we'll discuss some of those things, or just political theory and how it intertwines with theology. We'll talk about those things a lot. I mean, I wrote maybe some of your listeners don't know. I wrote a book with Gab founder Andrew Torba called Christian Nationalism. So I'm very involved in those debates. And so we'll talk about those things, CJ and I, and what it simply means for Christians to engage in politics in the 21st century. How does that work? How does it, particularly in our context in America? And so CJ, he writes for Chronicles magazine. I think you're going to be on a podcast.
Yeah, I'm recording with him on Thursday.
And so, excuse me, he. Brilliant dude. Don't tell him I said that. Brilliant guy, really, and a great friend. I've known him for years. I actually have never gotten to meet him in person either. We've only ever known each other on the internet. It's weird how you have these, relationships with people that this guy's like a brother to me, and yet.
You've never shook his hand or anything like that?
I've never seen. He might not be real. He might be an AI creation for all I know. I don't know for sure if he's a real flesh and blood human being. I think so. He awesome guy, and really it's really an honor that he's willing to join with me and have these discussions, because he brings so much to these podcasts that we do. And really, he is a protege of Dr. Paul Gottfried. That's been really his main intellectual mentor is Paul Gottfried, and you can tell he knows paleoconservative political philosophy like the back of his hand, both Paul and CJ too, and so the kind of political commentary CJ is able to give is, I think, second to none. He is criminally underfollowed on Twitter, and I mean, I'll say it because it's my podcast too, but it's like, oh, we're new, and so it's not going to be very big. But it's like, if people knew how great CJ is, they would want to listen. So yeah, definitely check that out. He has tremendous stuff to say. Especially he, like Paul Gottfried, he understands like the political theory of Carl Schmitt, for example, really, and beyond just like the memes.
Mm-hmm.
Like he understands it at a deep level, and how to discern some of these political questions of how do you operate when there's this powerful regime that hates you, that you have no ability to affect whatsoever, right? How do we operate within that paradigm? That dominates a lot of our discussion. And so, yeah, we've been at it since I think February is when we started. I think we're on episode 13 this week. So I'll be recording with him on Thursday as well. So right after you,
it all works out.
Yeah, he does like 10 podcasts on Thursday and like caps off the day with us. So he's like worn out by the time he does it with me. But yeah, it's a great honor to be joined up with him. He's a good friend.
Yeah, no, I'm glad. And I think that's probably the most preeminent question for today's politics, is that how does someone who is hated by the regime, try and get by and survive in the midst of not really being able to affect much change. I think that we've seen over the course of really the last 5 years especially just how fast things move in respects to, if you take one option, they're going to learn from it and shut it down or try a way to subvert it and take it away.
Yeah.
And so really, I guess, what is the general approach for you? I mean, as someone who had co-authored that book on Christian Nationalism, which I've read, I owe that book a review, actually. So I've now put
it's not
my...
very long, so it should
No,
be easy
no,
to...
it should be easy, right? The nice big font too helps, right?
That's right.
But no, I've told myself I owe a review, and now I'm saying it to your face. So now I definitely have to get it out. But yeah, I mean, it's the preeminent question of how do we make do, and
Yeah.
I think everyone and their mother from CJ to Rod Dreher has tried to tackle that question with not much effect.
Yeah.
And so, from your perspective, both as the co-author of that book, as a pastor, someone who's very active in the community, what are the avenues that you see for people trying to make do and survive and flourish in this environment?
Yeah, I think some of it is, it's a challenging question because of the uncertainty of our situation. You can see it. I mean, it's like we're in this like choose your own adventure novel, where it can go a bunch of different directions, and you could see, and all of them are somewhat probable. So I mean, some people are absolutely certain that collapse of the regime is right around the corner. Other people are think it's like Niccolo Soldo is like 1,000-year American Empire. It's going to be here forever, and there's nothing we can do about it. Like, so there's like that spectrum of options, and everything in between those two. And so I'm somewhere in the middle, or I'm just like, well, I don't know what's going to happen, and so you kind of have to hope for the best and prepare for the worst. And neither one of them, I mean, both of those options is kind of the worst in different ways. So I'm hopeful that we can like thread that needle where things continue to decline and get worse, but then that radicalizes enough people to actually do things and build communities and businesses despite all of the regime uncertainty that discourages that. Despite that, to be able to build things and weather these storms and come out on top. And so I know, so you have to like take an account of, okay, what are your assets and your liabilities? What do we have like as a people? And one, and the major asset that we have is that, regardless of all of the shenanigans of 2020, you have like 70 or 80 million people who supported Donald Trump. So like that, just take that as a baseline, that the majority of those people have, pretty strong right-wing sympathies. The majority of them would say that they're Christians. And so from that like cluster of people, you have a big chunk of the population that more or less thinks the same way you do, that is, really part of this American nation, right? Has this American identity strongly. And you can build with 70 million people. And so like that's one thing. The problem is they're all spread out, and not just spread out geographically, they're spread out and atomized as individuals. So that's the big liability of that asset. And so like just thinking through that, it's like, well, the thing that needs to be done is bringing those people together, organizing them the best that we can, leading them, and you know, creating communities and political structures, you know, even patronage systems, things of this nature, where our people can gain political power, and like it's like that sounds easy when you put it that way, when you just say it, but yeah. It's a tremendous amount of work to do these things. I think, I mean, you look at Rod Dreher, you bring him up. I have a book that is going to be coming out this summer called, it's the same name as my Twitter name, The Boniface Option, after Rod Dreher's book. Like, I read Dreher's book when it came out, I think 2017, and everyone was abuzz about it. Oh, this is great, this is terrible, whatever. I read it and I thought, well, there's some good stuff here for sure. But at the same time, there's like no solution. It's just, all right, we fall back to the monastery and then profit. And it's like then we save the West somehow. Like he's presenting a near-term strategy, but nothing beyond, all right, fall back and then what?
Yeah.
Right. Fall back and then what? He kind of just wants you to put that together for yourself. And maybe it's because he is like anti-Schmidt-pilled that he can't say, all right, you fall back, you consolidate power where you can, and then you crush your enemies. That's the next step. Right?
Yeah.
The obvious next step is like, they want to put, trannies in your public school. No, I mean, that's the thing, like where I am. I've been like, I can probably say this publicly because I don't know if they're actually going to do it. But I've been lobbying my city council people because in Minnesota, every city council can pass a city ordinance that criminal city ordinances that are misdemeanor, 90 days in jail, $1,000 fine. And I'm like, you need to pass a city ordinance that displaying pornography to children, and he is or propagating transgenderism among children. You can filter it through whatever legal mumbo jumbo you want. Basically, that any of the teachers at the school, if they push tranny stuff on the kids, they're going to jail. Like, you could do that in your city if you have the will to do it. And so I'm trying to summon that will in these guys. And like things like that. Like, if you're involved locally in politics, you can push little things like that to crush these enemies that we have. And if you're able to consolidate power locally, you can do more of those kinds of things. So that's kind of your Dreher kind of strategies. Well, you fall back, you build communities of your people, and the next step, the kind of things that I talk about in my book, is then you fight. Then you go on the offensive, you go and attack. And that's, St. Boniface, he was a Benedictine monk. He was a Benedictine monk who left the monastery to go evangelize the Germans across the Rhine. And he cut down Thor's Oak, and a bunch of them converted because of it. And he ministered to them, and he was eventually martyred by them. By my ancestors actually killed him. The Frisians, a war band of Frisians, martyred him. And you go on the offensive, you go and attack, and that's what he did. You leave the monastery and you go expand. It's really a handbook for aggressive Christianity. Like, change it, because you look at it. Prudentialist. I don't know exactly what your Christian tradition is. I know that you post go to church every Sunday.
Yeah, so, I uninstall Twitter every weekend, and I have those two memes that go up, which is good night, go to church, and good morning, go to church.
That's right.
Well, I didn't grow up one really particularly any tradition. My father's dog tag say Methodist, but a military chapel is a glorified social club if you grow up in sort of a Protestant background. Because on military bases, I don't know if it's still the same since my dad retired a few years back, but it's just basically social club, non-denomination, by extension Baptist service, or then you have some sort of Roman Catholic mass. I didn't really grow up with anything, so 2020 for me, I had COVID happen. My kidneys failed due to a birth defect, and so it was just like, all right, try to find God. And I found my way within the Orthodox Church of America, but as I've similarly told other people, I agree with Stephen Wolfe on this, where he was just like, white evangelicals are the moral block of the country, and it's like, the
lone bulwark.
Yeah, the lone bulwark of the moral order of how this country works. That's why they're so important to Republican primaries. That's why you see everyone from Lindsey Graham to, what's his name from the other Carolina senator, Tim Scott. They'll take the religious, talking point, even though they don't believe worth anything, right?
At any of it,
I agree with Wolfe here, and it's just like, I realistically know that, like, not everyone's going to go on to be like a traditional Latin Mass person or someone enjoying the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, but like, I think every Christian in the United States, regardless of their church or denomination, realizes that there is a very coordinated effort to attack Christ and to attack those that follow him. I was telling this to a gentleman named Anglo Ortho last summer. I said, within the span of a week, there was like some sort of David French style article in The Atlantic attacking evangelical Christianity. At the same time, you had numerous articles about the Roman Catholic Church, and then NPR went on the offensive on the Orthodox. It's just like, it doesn't matter what church you retreat to, they're going to come after you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I had, there is a retired pastor now, I think he's retired, who was in Boulder. He would speak at these conferences. A few of the guys here would go to these conferences and of conservative Presbyterian ministers and of this this one ministry, and he had ministered in Boulder, Colorado for decades as a conservative Presbyterian pastor, and he would talk about like the Ministerial Association of Boulder, Colorado, and they would get together and they'd pray for local city leaders and things like this. And one thing that he mentioned, in these talks that he would give, he would talk about how Boulder, Colorado is like America 20 years into the future. So all of America is going to be like this in 20 years. And so these talks he gave were like 20 years ago, right? And so he would be discussing things with these different ministers in Boulder, Colorado, and many of them were from fairly liberal denominations like United Methodist and ELCA and things like that, PCUSA. And in Boulder, they would be either by happenstance or whatever, they would be like the most conservative ministers in the entire denomination of United Methodist or whatever, and they happen to be in like the most liberal city in America, and so they would be there, and all of these guys, they would feel this kinship with one another despite their doctrinal differences, very serious doctrinal differences. I mean, there was the Roman Catholic priest was there too. I mean, these are differences where people were literally killing each other over a few hundred years ago. And so here they are together, praying for each other, working together, working through, different pastoral issues that they had locally. And there was this brotherhood in arms that they had that he described. And he said, like, we were way closer to all these people in all these various denominations compared to our own denomination. We could have all these fights in our own denomination, all these internecine struggles in our own denominations. But then, like, on the ground there in Boulder, like, I was tight with Father Herman, is what you talk about, the Catholic brother. He and I were like brothers, And this is like unheard of. But now, fast forward 20 years now, and it's really this way, or starting to be this way everywhere else. Where I have, like in my town, there is one of my closest friends that is not in my congregation owns a brewery. He is a traditionalist Roman Catholic, goes to Latin Mass, and he doesn't, I don't know if he thinks the Pope is legitimate or not. I don't know if it really matters. But he's that's the type of Catholic he is. Like if I were Roman Catholic, that would basically be where I would be, and like just that far on the right. not just politically, but culturally and within your own Christian tradition. And so, he jokes around about like, yeah, if this were 200 years ago, I would be burning you at the stake. And I'm like, well, I know.
Yeah.
I know.
I think we know. I think everyone knows, though, that the enemy's at the gates.
Yeah, exactly.
And at this point, that's been a lot of discourse that we've seen on Twitter as well. Speaking of Rod Dreher, right, is that whole back and forth between him and Charles Haywood about the concept of no enemies to the right. And right now, I think that the circumstances kind of behoove all of us to recognize that I have a lot more in common with you, politically and culturally, than I'm going to than the guy that wants to trans my kid right down the road. Like, it's just not going to happen that way. Yeah. And I think that, and it's funny because like Charles has had that position a lot longer than anyone realizes. Like, he reviewed. This was like back a few years. This was like during Trump's administration, but he was reviewing George Hawley's right-wing critiques of American conservatism. Great book. If you want to find all the people that you should be listening to, you're probably going to find him in that book. And Charles is just like, I don't see why Rand Paul and say like, the guys of George Lincoln Rockwell's days, they probably have a lot more in common than they do in difference. And you're just like, whoo boy. He's like, why don't they work together? And it's just like, well, Charles.
Well, there's reasons.
There's reasons for that, but I appreciate the spirit about it.
Oh, man.
But I think at this point where everyone is sort of realizing across the board where it's just like, yeah, things are that bad. And I think for a moment we can put aside these differences for the sake of, well, no, they're it's what, now 2 million people have crossed the border last year. And we've got an unspeakable amount of just regime-sponsored terror. That's the only way I can really describe what happened in Nashville. Yeah, it was state-sponsored terrorism, really. To go out of your way and have 6 Christians martyred, and then to go say, yeah, like it's Trans Day of Visibility.
And to say trans people are being under attack right now.
Yeah.
Like they hadn't even buried their kids yet.
No.
And yet they claim themselves the victim of the thing that they did. And that's, yeah, you're gonna get me going on this. And, I promise no Fed posting today. No Fed posting. But it's astounding what they're doing. And yet, I see this online, like right now, there continues to be, at least within like evangelical Twitter and online world, this massive controversy over Christian nationalism, and a lot of it is there are like doctrinal reasons, there are theological reasons why people have this trepidation, but I think a lot of the controversy is that, all right, we see the things happening right now. They are literally the main question at hand is it okay for people to have their little boys castrated voluntarily? Is it okay for them to have their teenage girls have their breasts chopped off? Like, that's in the mainstream. It's not just some fringe weirdo thing that happens only in like Boulder, Colorado. It's mainstream in America that this is happening. And what was the was it the tweet from like Libs of TikTok or something, talking about how, or End Wokeness, one of these accounts, talking about how like North Carolina, like Duke University Hospital, they've operated on a 3-year-old and like a 4-year-old. Like it isn't even like teenage. It's like little kids. They're doing this stuff too, and so you see millions of Christians are seeing this and seeing that the political theology that their pastors have and their Christian leaders hold to doesn't have an answer for these things. It doesn't have. Because basically the evangelical, and that's the the dominant religious tradition among American Christians is some form of evangelicalism, right? And so whether you would lump like Southern Baptists into that, and then all the various non-denominational churches, they're basically this kind of Baptistic evangelical Protestant, and that political theology, largely is informed by dispensationalism. Mm-hmm. So there's all sorts of issues there where a lot of dispensationalists, they just completely reject doing anything in the here and now because, well, Jesus is going to come back any day, and we're worried about heaven. We're not really worried about earth. that's some of the time, they'll rely on that. Like it produces a lot of cope for people that feel powerless. So it's especially, I think, dangerous in these days. But also they adopt a certain pietistic mindset where well, the answer is always just Jesus. It's always it's like a little kid's Sunday school class where it's like God, Jesus, Bible. Those are the answers.
Yeah.
Right? And so what do we do about transient kids? Well, we just need to preach the gospel. And people are seeing this and saying, yeah, but if someone breaks into my house and is gonna, rape my wife and kill me, is the answer preaching the gospel or is the answer shooting that person? And we know what the answer is. Like a rational, decent person, normal person would say, no, you shoot that guy. Like that's what you do. And so you apply the same, standard to politics, and it's no, you fight them. You fight these people and you stop them. And so Christian national, or what's become called even the whole controversy of Christian nationalism. I mean, it started really after January 6th, where they were like, oh, it's this. And they wanted to lump it in with white nationalism.
Yeah, that was as soon as J6 happened, that was the media's turn of phrase was to say white Christian nationalism.
Yeah, because they have the picture of the guys holding up the cross in front of the Capitol and things like that.
They realized the tiki torch image wasn't going to work for them, so they had to go get the target right in front of them.
Because they see that the lone bulwark is a threat to the regime. And so that's why they attack Christians, is they want to view them as a domestic terrorist group. And that goes right back into Stephen Wolfe's tweet, right? And so the flip side of this is you have all of these people who fit this description, who are Christians, that are patriotic, they love their country, many of them have served in the military, or their family members have. Right? They love this place, and they've been here for generations. Right? Mm-hmm. Every family member has served in every war since the Civil War. And these people are public enemy number one, and so this becomes it became a thing after that, and here I am, I would be chatting, I'd be writing online well, that the way they describe it, that sounds more or less like what I believe, and that's not bad. And it sounds like everything most of the people I know believe. And so I was...
Yeah, I mean, they've done a really good job gaslighting, the public, saying, no, the guy that goes to church every Sunday and helps out with the elderly, loves his country, votes Republican, he's going to kill you. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we saw that during the election, too, both in 2016 and 2020. The guy that, flies the American flag in his yard is public enemy number one. And so, I think this is the biggest issue that we've seen is well, what is the political answer? And it's funny, on my way down here, I drive past this Baptist church, and it has a billboard right across the road, which right next to across the road by the church is this 40-foot tall white cross. But it says, Jesus is the answer to all your questions. And I'm like, yes, correct, but
how in this case?
How in this context? And that's why, and again, I saw Canon Press, the guys that published Wolfe's own book, go after him about it, even though there was no one had an answer otherwise to his claim, because it was true. Yeah. White evangelicals in this country, the WASPs that are still around, are the ones that are the bulwark that says no to this. And if you took that away, we would be going and descending into San Francisco any day now. Yeah,
everyone knows it, but we are socially engineered. I mean, I tweeted about this the other day. We're socially engineered to not talk about these things, and to believe that if you care about ethnicity in any way, then you are a bad person.
Yep.
And so that was what provoked so much of the visceral reaction to Wolfe. Isn't the fact that his statement was false, because nobody ever said it was false. I mean, there were maybe some stupid people that just don't know the statistics. But nobody ever said it was false. It was that you're bad. I even had some guy show up in my mentions who was like, yeah, it's true, but it's still sinful. It's like, what? Are you kidding me? But this is how much people have been propagandized into believing that race and ethnicity existing and being very real categories of people groups is this moral issue, to even believe it. How do you begin to have a conversation like that? How do you begin to say that why, if you talk about thanks to Tucker, actually. The conversation about demographic replacement has forcibly entered the mainstream because of him. And so you bring up the obvious demographic replacement of white people in America, and then the first question you should ask is, why are they doing that? Why do they want that? Right? Why are they trying to get rid of these people, us? Why do they want us to have fewer babies? Why do they want people who are not like us to replace it? Like, why is that? Why did they want that? And it's for the same reason Stephen made that tweet.
Yeah.
Like, it's obvious. It's obvious. We are the enemy. We are the enemy. They don't want us. They want us destroyed because we stand in the way of this, utopia that they want, or dystopia.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of killiasm that they're aiming for, you are in the way of it, especially that. And I mean, and then they go down the rabbit hole. Then you start researching, like, well, why is diversity our strength? Well, public trust dissipates, public participation in civic affairs disappears. Amazon makes sure that their workforces at Whole Foods is diverse so people don't unionize. And you're just like, oh, that makes, it really activates the almonds right there. Starts getting me thinking. And so the one thing that like Dreyer's book was like really prominent about was like if you are a really church-going person and that you advocate for, and again it was another term that I kept seeing trend on Twitter, like cultural Christianity. Like if you practice the gospel, if you practice the doctrines of your respective church or denomination, you are probably already in the minority, and you need to act accordingly. And to me, the answer that I found, because like Dreyer's book, like I agree with you, like he kind of ends it saying like figure it out for yourself.
Yeah.
But I thought the answer was found more recently with a friend of mine, Ernst van Zyl, who goes by Conscious Caracol. He lives in South Africa. He wrote a great piece in the American Conservative saying like the way that you go forward is building demographic and political concentrations of power to take care of your own people, to facilitate patronage, like things that we have seemingly lost in our political historical perspective, even though it's been part of this country forever since the beginning. And we go out and then we start reclaiming what's ours or, securing ourselves. And for some reason, this is news to people or that you just can't talk about it. And to me, that's why I thought Gottfried's most recent book, Dr. Gottfried's book, Anti-Fascism, Course for a Crusade, that's it. That's your civilizational foundational myth post-45, is everything is construed as fascism. And I don't know if you saw this tweet, but someone was asking, talking about like the trans protesters and things like that. So what is it if I stand in opposition to transing the kids, trans-affirming healthcare, drag queen story hour? Oh, you're a Nazi. Thank you, ma'am. That's it.
That's and they frame it that way. It's I keep teasing this, and I get distracted by things like coming down to Dallas and things like that. But I one of the articles that I've spent a lot of time on that I haven't published yet, because I don't quite have it done to my liking, because you have to be very clear and careful with this subject, is demythologizing World War II and the World War II narrative. And I say this all the time, but it is. I mean, I have relatives, ancestors that fought in the Second World War, that died in that war for our country, and yet I look back on it, and it as the founding myth is false. It's wrong. This founding myth. It's taken us down this anti-Christian pathway. That's the starting point of it, and it's there's no way around it. Like we can think of it as this great, wonderful moral crusade, but the reality is that it was a war to establish international leftism. Period. Like that's what it was. It was a war to, one, save the Soviet Union, and two, establish global democracy everywhere. That's not good. And so the way people should think about the 20th century and the Second World War is that you have these monstrous post-Christian ideologies at war with one another. That's what this war was about, including the one that we fought for. We aren't the good guys. We're just one of the bad guys, and one of the bad guys that came out on top. And especially if you look at like in like Christian just war terms, like jus ad bello or jus ad bello, conduct within the war. Like we were murdering civilians on purpose, tens and hundreds of thousands of them on purpose. Like that's not good. that's evil. Just that alone should get people to like step back and reconsider. All right, were we the good guys in this war, or were we just slightly less bad than the other guys? And so that I think once you take that pill, though, like once you begin to reconsider these, then like everything starts to fall apart. Like that's the foundation that all of this is built on. Then you can question like, well, is democracy really that good? Like maybe, we don't even really have a democracy. We just have this weird oligarchy that rules over everything and then just backfills it with a fake election. Like things like you begin questioning the whole system and reevaluating, well, there's got to be a better way. And maybe there was a better way under Christendom. Maybe having, and regardless of however the polity is set up, whether you have a republic or a monarchy or whatever, like that doesn't actually really matter that much. But the structure of your society existing and having and believing in these myths like egalitarianism, that like all people are all the same. It's like, no, there's hierarchies in nature and there's hierarchies among human beings. Like relearning those things. So that gets into the question as well. Like with the lone bulwark stuff is if you in your heart of hearts believe in egalitarianism, that every single human being is a tabula rasa, and if you just educate them well and love them well, they're all going to be 170 IQ geniuses that can dunk basketballs and win Super Bowls. Like that's not like.
Well, I mean, not even Christian academic or even non-Christian academics will tell you that. I mean, Murray Rothbard is not by any means the stretch of the imagination Christian.
No.
But I mean, he had famously talked about the fact that egalitarianism is a revolt against nature.
Yes.
It's a revolt against the natural order. And I mean, like a lot of these questions that we're asking ourselves here, like once you sort of break past that sort of mythological mind virus over in the West, is that you realize that a lot of answers to these questions have been, they're hundreds, if not 1,000 years old. We have
answers to all of them. And
yeah,
we've always had the answers.
We've always had them. We've always had them. We've just somehow lost them over this like 75-year, fog that we've been in. Like I was just reading Considerations on France by Joseph de Maistre, and he's talking about democracy. And like we're gonna have this like council of 255 people and a nation of 24 million, and assuming if every man lived forever, every person could help rule their country and have sovereignty every 60,000 years. And I'm thinking to myself, this is in the 1790s with a country of 24 million people. I got how many? 535 members of Congress and a nation of 331 million people.
Yes,
right?
Sounds familiar.
It sounds familiar. And in the same way that, I was listening to my priest this last Sunday. He was talking about C.S. Lewis. He was talking about the abolition of man. And in my hubris, for a split second, I was like, oh, that sounds a lot like an Orrin McIntyre video. And I'm like, no, you moron. Like... No, your priest knows what he's talking about. He's not listening to some guy on the internet. Like these questions are so much older than your actual, than whatever whenever you just first started taking that red pill, right? And so people need to realize that there are answers that go back much older. These debates about Christian nationalism or what is the proper way to rule on this earth as we await Christ's return. These were debates that people like Augustine and Eusebius of Caesarea were having 1,700 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like so much of it and so many of these discussions and debates, like I feel like just bashing my head against the wall because the historical ignorance is palpable. And like, I mean, you just read like Augustine's City of God, and you understand, that these questions have been thought through already. We've had these discussions. You read any historical theology as it relates to political rule, and people have thought about this for a very long time. And they had systems that have worked. I mean, one of these guys that has been critical. This article, and I did the Twitter space on it last week. This article where he's like, every time Christendom has been tried, it failed. And it's like, well, Christendom lasted for like 1,500 years. So I don't know. If I set something up and it keeps going for 1,500 years, that sounds like a success to me.
Yeah.
And like they're just total ignorance, right? They don't understand that these things are imperfect. Of course, there's going to be problems. There's going to be sin. These are sinful men still at the end of the day. Yet, God has given us this world, and He doesn't want His people to just sit and be a dog that continually gets kicked. He wants us to rule. Like you read the New Testament, actually. Like if you have eyes to see this, it talks this way. Like the Apostle Paul talks this way to the Christians that when the Corinthians are going and taking each other to court, he says, "Do you not know one day you're going to rule over angels? Do you not know this?" Like the New Testament, the whole New Testament period actually is transference of the angels ruling the old covenant world and the demons, the ancient gods, and giving that over to man, in Christ. And like you see, like that's this transference that's going on right in the New Testament, and the world is being given over to the church. I mean, Jesus at the very end of Matthew gives the Great Commission. It says, "Go into the world and baptize the nations, and to teach them and disciple them into everything that I've commanded you to do." Right? You're going to go into the world and teach these nations everything, and bring them into my kingdom. That doesn't sound like, hey, just hang out in your rapture bunker waiting for the rapture to come. It sounds like, no, you go on the offensive and you go take these nations for me. And so there's just this huge disconnect between people that are like primed, and I think some of it is just the historical circumstance. Right? I don't know if you're familiar with Aaron Renn and his 3 Worlds of Evangelicalism that he wrote in First Things a couple of years ago.
I'm not familiar, no.
But he just basically said like there's really these 3 paradigms that evangelicalism has operated in kind of our lifetimes, where there was positive world, where this is really until the 80s or 90s, where generally you run into somebody on the street, random person, you ask them, "Hey, what do you think of Christians? Are Christians good people or bad people?" They're like, "Oh yeah, they're good people." Or if you're like applying for a job and you say, "I go to such and such church," like in positive world they would say, "Oh, this is a good person. He goes to church. He's a good guy." Generally viewed as positive. Then you have neutral world, really from like the 1990s until the mid 2000s, where it was neither good nor bad. It was just, that's just a thing you do. That's like, you go to church, I like to golf. Like, okay, that's it. And then negative world is really like from like 2015 on, where now if you say, "Oh, I'm a Christian," people's perception of you, the general public perception of Christians is, you're a bad person. You hate gay people, and you're probably racist, and we don't like you. And so that's the world that the church lives in today. And so these guys who are like anti-Christendom and anti-Christian nationalism and everything within the church today, who are conservative, they're stuck in this like neutral world where they think it's like 1990, and that if they can just come up with really persuasive arguments, that's what will make people Christians. And they think that like cultural Christianity, like this nominal Christianity where people just say they're Christians but aren't really, that's really, really bad. Like Mayberry, assuming that everyone in Mayberry is a Christian, and that's really bad. And it's like, no, I would like to live in Mayberry. Everyone would like to live in Mayberry.
Yeah, everyone would like to go back to Mayberry.
That was good.
This is the thing with like the IDW as well. It doesn't even have this Christian veneer over it, which is kind of funny because to me, like, new atheism fell apart because it tried to simultaneously hold on to the science is correct on all things, including evolution. And oh, by the way, everyone's equal. Yeah, and so you either got the wokesters or you got the hardcore right. Human biodiversity crowd. That's really what emerged from new atheism. Nothing in between. Yeah. And so the Christians are just looking at these people on like 2 sides of the cliff, like, oh well, good thing we avoided that. And so, but like I think that a lot of people, even with the IDW and maybe some of this cultural stuff, is that there's that strong desire to go back to the neutral world 1990s style deal. My friend academic agent likes to call this return to Fresh Prince.
Yeah.
And I wholeheartily agree that seems to be the case. And I mean, like, that's not the world that we live in.
And it's not coming back. And like that neutral world, I think the way I frame it is, it's the off ramp from Christendom to demon world. And that's what that neutral world was. And we are now in demon world. Like there's no, like, you can't just live on the off ramp, on ramp. Like, you can't just park your car there and stay. Like, you have to go there or stay on the freeway. And
you can stay on the royal path, or you can diverge to the left or right, and that's where you're going to end up. Those are the off ramps.
But they want to camp out right there, set up their tent right on the on ramp, and get run over. But that's what neutral world was. That's what the 1990s was. That's what Paul Gottfried's you bring him up again. His article, his recent Chronicles article, was about is liberalism, and a lot of people want to criticize the use of liberalism or whatever, but like liberalism was the thing. Wokeness didn't come from a bunch of left-wing people decided to read Karl Marx or even read the Frankfurt School and then like concoct these ideas about transgenderism or whatever. Wokeness came from the failure of liberalism. Right? Liberalism was not able to contain this monster that got out because liberalism can't contain anything. It could have been if you had a more right-wing culture with right-wing political power being projected and everything else, you could have had a far-right version of wokeness take over as well.
Yeah.
Conceivably, at least. But it's just that liberalism is just weakness, period. It's not strong enough unless there's a strong force upholding it, And so, anyway...
Gottfried's literally only like reiterating the point that Schmitt made in concept of the political, almost a century ago. Mm-hmm. We have not gotten over that. And people like to think that we have, and we certainly haven't. And I find that absolutely, it bewilders me, right? Because it's just, we've lost this historical understanding due to that sort of post-war narrative. Mm-hmm. And so, I like that off-ramp analogy that you use, because there was a gentleman called Pope Head. He's a very traditionalist. He lives in Rome. He's a diehard Roman Catholic. I love the guy. He's a great mutual. But he said, what this post-Christianity looks like that you are living in is a lot like the film The Wicker Man, where sane people are burned alive and people are joyously celebrating and sacrificing the altars to new gods. And right now, child sacrifice is very much back in vogue.
Yes, it is in multiple forms. Obviously you have the industrialized child sacrifice of abortion, but then you also have like trannyism is the same thing, because you have these Munchausen by proxy mothers who want their child to be trans because it's a status symbol.
Yep.
And so they will literally birth a human being to mutilate him just to get social status.
Yeah.
That's a sacrifice to themselves, to the god of themselves, more than anything.
Yeah.
And so it isn't, and some of it is like these gods reappear in this way. That's been actually a controversy that I've engaged in, a friendly controversy with friends. Is I'm of the opinion that these gods, because there's some people that think like these demons that ruled the ancient world, that our ancestors worshipped in Europe and everywhere else, that they are back, right? That they can come back, and maybe it's true. Jesus talks about the house being swept and 7 more demons coming. That could be the situation we're in. I'm not totally 100% sold even on this position that I'm holding currently, but I don't. I think it could be. I'm not going to say no for sure, but I think that. The issue, though, is that Christ has come, the gospel has been here in America, and evil has been on the march, of course, and there's certainly demonic force behind these things, without a doubt, I think. But I don't think the demons are powerful enough to reappear and come back and be these entities that people are going to be worshiping and having Odin worship reestablished in America, or I suppose it would be like some kind of Aztec god, Quetzalcoatl or something. I don't even know. But whatever god, or they'll come up with new names. That's the other thing too. Let's come up, and that's kind of how it works.
There was a talk by the late Father Thomas Hopko, who's an Orthodox priest, but he was talking about about the word itself, Antichrist. And he says, for a lot of people, we should look at it as ANTE, like the antediluvian or antebellum. Like, people are putting God, they're putting themselves before God. They view themselves as the God, right? Like the gods of the copybook headings, essentially, from Rudyard Kipling. And I think that you see that more obvious than not, especially when you see things like, most of the kids who are considered trans are single mothers who have mental disorders and things like that. And again, you also cross that third rail, that red line that people get uncomfortable about. Is this like, well, if you are a white, well-to-do, progressive, leftist, liberal, whatever, what is the positive role model for a white, straight male progressive? There isn't one. So what do you have to do? Well, you have to mutilate yourself. You have to castrate yourself.
Or the other thing too is like, why is there a rise in this exponential rise of LGBT identity among American youths? And some of it is like, if you are a young white man, at a certain level, you early on realize you are at the bottom of the diversity totem pole. And so there's only a couple things you can do to climb up that totem pole. One of them is to say you're gay or to become gay. And two is to become a woman. And some of most male to female tranny stuff is just these guys who get so into porn that they become autogynephiliacs.
Yep.
And it isn't even that they're gay; it's that they want to become the object of their own obsession. And so it's like, okay, those are the options for you, young white man. Either that or becoming a right-wing dissident.
Yeah, which way Western man is pretty much that question. You can either mutilate yourself or you can join the side of sanity.
Yeah, exactly. And there's every disincentive to doing the latter. There's really zero incentives other than your own sanity. There's a pretty big incentive there, but that is, going back to one of your original questions, all the way back to the beginning, circling back, as Peppermint Patty once said, circling back, to thinking through, okay, what do we do? What are the options? We've talked about the Rod Dreher idea of falling back and reasserting strength and just consolidating. And I forget, you mentioned your friend who wrote
Conscious Caracol.
Yes, yeah. And that's exactly, we're all kind of arriving at the same spot where it's like, okay, we're figuring out what to do there is, now you consolidate political power and you crush your enemies and then you advance from there. You do the things that our ancestors did always, and you develop these networks and build up your friends and punish your enemies. And so thinking about those things, one of the things that I constantly talk about as well is that there is this glut of young, talented, bright young men who young Christian men, white men, they know if they're smart, they know they're not going to be well sought after by the Fortune 500, HR, W2 work world. They're unless they're the creme de la creme, and even then, one, you're not going to enter the world where you can become the creme de la creme because you're not going to be allowed into Harvard and Yale and all the elite schools. So that's already setting you back. And then secondly, you are not, you failing that, you're not going to be at the top of the diversity hiring schedule for any place you would want to get a job. So that your opportunities are going to be much more limited than they otherwise would be. And so because of this, you have millions of young men who are very disaffected because their economic opportunities are lessened. They have lower opportunity with young women. And so they're less opportunity with young women. And so everything about their life sucks because of things outside of their control, right? It'd be one thing if your life sucks because you're an idiot and you've made poor choices. But you didn't choose to be white and you didn't choose to be a man. You just were born that way. And so
funny how the born that way argument has made its full circle back to the right.
I know. Speaking of full circle. And so that life sucks because these other people have done this to you and done this to your society. And that leaves a lot of young men vulnerable to being radicalized, sometimes by good people and sometimes by bad people on the internet. And you see this, you talk about the popularity of international pimp Andrew Tate.
Yep.
That's part of it. Is like this guy says stuff that's true. He critiques feminism as only a pimp can, and he talks about masculinity in ways. I mean, it's obviously goofy, and he's smoking his cigar with his shirt
very
off,
performative,
and yeah, it's ridiculous. But at the same time, like he says things that are true about masculinity that young men don't learn from their pastors, right? They're not gonna, when you when you think of it, like if you're a young evangelical Christian man in America, if you ask them like, who are some of the most masculine guys you know, it's pretty good odds that your pastor is not going to be mentioned in that list. Pretty good odds. And there are reasons for that. Like the church is dominated by women, the evangelical churches, and so the pastor is going to be this very gregarious, soft, friendly guy who would never offend anyone ever. And
longhoused again.
Yes, I mean exactly. Yes. Like the evangelical pastor is like the most longhoused guy in an entire nation of longhoused men, and so the young guy sees Andrew Tate or other figures, and sees him saying true things that you're not allowed to say, and you become a follower of this guy. You like this guy, and so some of it is. Like pastors, especially young ones, need to tell the truth about these things. Like that's in my book. I talk about this stuff. That like pastors need to not be cowards, and they need to be willing to say true things. And some of it is like when you're young and a pastor. Like this is one reason why I could never be like a mega church pastor of like tens of thousands of people. Because you kind of have to be a sociopath to do that, for one. And like I can't not tell the truth about things. And like they definitely can not tell the truth. Like they can just lie their way into whatever. You have to be a people pleaser to get to those types of positions. But young men who want to be pastors and serve in ministry, like that has to be the biggest qualification. Is, are you willing to say the thing that nobody else is going to say? Right, that is true, but they're terrified to say it. Are you willing to stand up to women and say no? And if you're not, like my friend Michael Foster, he had a it shouldn't have been controversial, but stupid that it was, controversial tweet about when they're selecting elders for their church. Maybe you saw this. I don't know. He's like, well, when we're interviewing men to be elders for our church, one of the first questions I ask them is, tell me about a time that you had an argument with your wife and you won. What's that look like? And people flipped out. He's a misogynist. He hates women. And it's like, no, like to be an elder in a church in Longhouse, America, I want guys that are willing to tell women no.
Yeah.
Because most of them are not. Most of them, and that's the thing, even in like really conservative churches where it's like, we're only going to have male elders. Right. This is the thing that happens is, yeah, they'll like nominally, like de facto, yeah, we're only going to have male elders and that's good. But it's like, who's actually running the church?
The
wives of the elders, right? They go to an elders meeting. My mentor and teacher, Doug Wilson, talks about this. He's like, you'd be in elders meetings and you decide something at the elders meeting and it's like, yep, this is what we're going to do. We're going to buy that color carpet and yada, yada, yada. And then like 30 minutes later, after the elders meeting is over, they all start getting emails to each other. It's like, maybe we should do this. And it's like, I wonder what happened there, But that is typical evangelical churches. Is they're dominated by women, regardless of like how the formal structure is. Even if they only have male pastors, even if they formally only have male leadership, they're still dominated by women. And so Foster is like counteracting that by saying, I not only want men, I want men that can tell women no. And if you're able to do that, like you are able to effectively change culture in this big way, where now you actually have not just nominal male leadership, you have actual male leadership, and culture is just religion externalized, and so really church is foundational in that way, where if you have a strong church that is in accord with reality, then you could have a community surrounding it that swims, downstream of reality rather than against it. And I think that's the way forward. I think you have to have this, and you have to have Christian leaders who are willing to tell the truth about things. Like our young men shouldn't have to go to, internationally known pimps for their truth, to find out what is real and what isn't, to find out what reality is. You shouldn't have to go to, or listen to, drug addicted Canadian psychologists, you like things like this is like, why is Jordan Peterson big? It's like, well, he told the truth one time in a costly way. And so now people trust him. Maybe you should try doing that. And so that is, I think that's the big thing. It's like we have millions of young men who are incredibly impressionable, and they're going to be directed in one way or the other, and they're going to be radicalized by how mistreated they've been. And so do you have answers for them or not is the question to like Christian leaders. And I put it to them all the time. It's like, if we change the leadership in Christian churches, and I've seen this happen actually, like there've been some guys where I'm like, that guy's squishy, he's always going to be a wimp. And this, you just get these impressions of people, right? And 2020 changed a lot of people. I mean, it revealed how wimpy a lot of people were, but it also forced some people to steal their spines or to find a spine. Yep. And I think things like that are going to continue to happen. I think the conversation around Christian nationalism is starting to open some eyes, because it's causing people to ask uncomfortable questions, like even the question of like nationhood and ethnicity. What does that even mean? That's an uncomfortable question people don't want to answer or even ask. And so like Wolfe with that tweet is like dredging it out. Is having this group of people in existence a good thing, or is it okay for them to be demographically replaced? Right? What do you think about that? And it's like these guys who are like catechized in liberalism, they don't want to answer that. They're like, no, there's no race but the human race. I'm not listening. Like that's what they do. And I think actually getting honest answers from people, and being able to have a conversation honestly, which is really costly because you're making yourself vulnerable to being thought of in the worst way possible in our society, actually brings forth the best men, because men instinctively respect courage, right? I see someone saying something that takes guts, and even whether I agree with it or not, like there's a degree of respect I have for a guy, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so like you want to, like these millions of young guys, like they're not going away. We keep making more of them, and there's millions of young white Christian men who know the life that their grandparents had, their grandpa had,
is gone.
They're never gonna have.
No.
And so what do? Should I become an acolyte of Andrew Tate, or even worse people?
Yeah. Your options are the way, the light, the truth, or a trafficking Mohammedan. Your call, right? You know?
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's why I liked 2021 was really the year that I really got to see a lot of people show their spines, because when they wanted to pull that vax mandate, I myself and a few others, we just went on stream and said they made the choice for us. I'm saying no. I don't care what the cost is. And I know quite a few people that did lose their jobs because of it, but you know what? They're a lot healthier and a lot safer for it. Those are the people that you can go to and trust in those kind of circumstances. And most
of the people I know, like if they quit their jobs, went somewhere else, like they have a better job now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 85% of the people I know who lost their jobs due to any kind of vax mandate, they're in a better place now, or they got to start the business that they wanted to start.
Yeah. Why would you want to stick around in a place that wants to do that to you?
Yeah.
Like that, and it wouldn't back you up.
Well, and I think it's all the more better that we're recording this in New Founding's office. Why would you work for somebody that hates you when you can go find a job or work for someone or invest in something that is filled with people that have courage, that can agree with you, and that you can trust? And it's just, that's the thing that just kills me about that. It's just like, why would you want to stay there when there are opportunities to be made? And I think really the nice way to dovetail and bring it into this discussion, though, is that we talk about what steps need to be done, where we're all coming to the same conclusion, is to remind ourselves that, the history of Christianity has been constantly watered by the blood of martyrs. And it doesn't mean that you're going to die, but it may mean that you may lose your job. It may mean that you will be ostracized. I mean, do you have the courage to be like St. Ambrose of Milan and tell the emperor to repent and no, you can't come to church until you do? Do you have that kind of courage to do so like the guys in the past? Do you have the courage like St. Boniface to cut down the tree and to face those consequences? And I think that that's something that needs to remind every Christian, regardless of their denomination, that is what your history is from and the cost of preaching the gospel. And that we already saw it in Nashville. 6 people were martyred because of what they believe in and who they were associated with, which is Christ. And I think that at the end of the day, that courage, all Christians need to realize it because it's in both the Old and New Testament. Your beliefs may cost your life. And Christ made that abundantly clear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, Mr. Isker, thank you so much for coming on.
Yes,
It's great to meet you in person.
Yes.
It's nice to meet another fellow from the GC, and maybe now with the vax mandate gone for travel, I can meet Gio or someone like that. But no, this is fantastic, man. Thanks for coming on to chat.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. And we can find you at
BonifaceOption. I'm on Twitter and Gab, and I write for Gab News, so news.gab.com is where all my writing is, and please check that out. And I will have a bunch more books and at Contra Mundum Podcast on YouTube and Gab TV, and we're everywhere else that you get audio podcasts. So check that out as well. We have a whole bunch more content coming very, very soon, and on top of podcasts, also books. So keep your eyes open for those things.
All right. Well, be sure to find all those links down below in the description. And once again, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.